Hi everyone, my name is Richard Santoro and I welcome you to Third and Zen, the YouTube channel where every week I'm sharing a spiritual message to nourish ourselves, heart, mind, body, and soul. First, thanks for stopping by the channel. Thanks for checking out today's video. I do hope that this video finds you doing well. I hope you're taking the time, the energy, the effort, the love, the patience to care for yourself, heart, mind, body, and soul. With that being said, let's just take a moment and just breathe. Just prepare ourselves for today's video, for today's message. Just let yourself soften, rest, ease into this moment. And we'll do our best to be as present as we can, knowing that the world's going to go on without us for a little bit. It'll be just fine. So just take another breath or two. And let's get started with today's message, shall we? So today, I'm going to veer a little bit into the personal lane. I'm going to talk about grief, and I'm going to talk about what happened and relate it to a message. I'm going to talk about what happened with the passing of my cat, Bob, that I shared on here a few months ago, that happened back in February. Now, before I get into it, a couple of disclaimers right off the bat. Number one, it's not just going to be me sharing of everything that happened and my feelings and all of it. There's going to be, a few messages tied in there. There will be fruit for us, I promise. And number two, it's going to be raw. It's going to be open and honest and emotional and touching on things, grief related, loss related, trauma related. And if you are in any way in a space where that might be upsetting or triggering for you, or a message that wouldn't get through because you're in a place where it'd be a challenge to hear it, I understand if you don't want to watch any further. I totally get it. This is to be for your benefit, for our benefit, not to anyone's detriment. So I just want to, give that fair disclaimer right off the bat. So if you got to check out, I love you. Be well. So, I was taught years ago that and then I went on to teach many people this thing, that you're not supposed to, in a sermon, in a message, share a personal story that you're not over yet, because you want to be able to be objective and unemotional and not break down. So I'm going to break that rule. So there might be tears, I'm not sure, but either way, I can tell you right away, I'm not over this, but I'm able to actually do this right now. So let me just briefly, as brief as I can do it, from the heart, talk about what happened, and then get into a little bit of fruit for us. So, back in February, I have 3 cats. I have 2 cats. And I just, the sun rises and then sets with them. And I have Bob and Jean and their siblings. And Bob was just the absolute best. He was like a puppy. Bob is the cat that everybody loved. And Bob and Jean are young. And one weekend, Bob wasn't acting normal. You could see something was up with him, and we thought that he had a UTI because he's a messy cat in the litter box, and he would always maybe get he'd get a urinary tract infection. So my roommate took him to the vet. We thought it was just routine, and within an hour or two, I got a text from her that it was that they're saying that everything's wrong. His liver, kidney, cancer, all of it, he's shutting down, and he needs to be put down. I went from thinking that to that, and so the next, I'm gonna try speaking up. I know I'm getting into the more serious whispery, so I apologize if that volume was an issue. I'll try to maintain a good volume here. So the next day, we took Bob to his regular vet to get a second opinion. And from that time, from when he initially went to the vet and we got the initial news up until we took the vet, it was brutal, it was terrible. And then that day, that Monday, we took him to the vet and they confirmed it. And they said, we could have a whole bunch of exploratory type stuff. He'd be in the hospital, and it doesn't mean that it would even help or that we would discover. And even if we did discover what was up, that we could do anything about it. And they really confirmed that. So we put him down. It was brutal. It was literally the worst moment of my life. It was horrible. The moments at the vet were terrible. It was traumatic. It was the worst moment of my life in many, many, many ways. And the rest of that day at home, worst day of my life. I have never cried and sobbed like that. I've never, and I'm like all of us. I've been through stuff. Life hasn't been a walk in the park. I've had things, of course I have, but I've never sobbed like this. The levels and the depth of where I was, I have never ever felt that. I was in absolute, utter, just disaster of grief. It was horrible, and for the next few days and that week, it was just absolutely horrible. So that's that story right up until that moment, okay? I was in this deep grief place, this horrible place. I didn't want, at that time, for those days that I was dealing with this, I didn't want any of the foundational tools in my toolbox, or the resources, or the mental and internal copings, the faith skills, none of the psychological skills that I've studied and used and imparted, none of the faith-based, spiritual, mindful, meditative, none of the heart, mind, body, soul tools at all. I didn't want any of that. I wanted nothing to do with that. I was continually using the word should a lot. And I just written a sermon that I haven't shared about the unhealthiness of using the word should. It was, Bob should be here. This shouldn't have happened. The space shouldn't be this empty. It was unfair. It shouldn't have happened. It was all bargaining and denial. Textbook stages, which are not a straight line. It's all over the place. But I was there. I couldn't at all lean into faith, trust, God, prayer, like I had in the past. The way I would phrase it, I had no room for it. I had no room for any of that stuff. I had no capacity for it. There was no room, no space for faith, for any of the tools. The grief took up all the space. And I couldn't even pray. I was so angry with God. I was so angry with God, and for good reason. And it's okay that I was, Bob shouldn't have died. I would look at my cats and I would always think how much I love them, and that I can't imagine what would happen if they're gone, but they were young. So I always thought, I can say that now, but we have plenty of time. We convince ourselves of these things that happen to other people won't happen to us. And I know, psychologically I was like that, but that's the way I thought. So I was in this, space of it shouldn't happen. I was in grief, and grief was upon me, pardon me, as they say, and it took up all the space. I wasn't functional at all. I mean, I was able to, go about my day, getting dressed and showering and, sometimes eating a little bit, but I wasn't a functioning human being like I was just a mess. All the tools, I could not use any of them. I just couldn't do it. Faith, trust, psychological, all those tools. The space was only filled with grief. I didn't want any of the other stuff. There was no room for it. As one of my best friends, Tim, said, yes, it's definitely a process, and one that will lead you rather than you leading it. And the way I just felt was that we don't handle grief. Grief handles us. And I was totally being handled by grief. The way I'm going to say it is, it was the worst days of my life, period. I was absolutely drowning in pain and grief. It was terrible. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I've described what that was like. I've described a portion of that journey where I was. Now let's talk about some messages for us. I'm going to impart 4 pieces of wisdom for us, so that maybe my journey and experience in some way, shape, or form can be reminders for all of us if we do ever find ourselves in this space of grief, deep grief. Number 1, it's okay to be a mess and not be at our best in any way, shape, or form. It is totally okay. When we are traumatized, when we have experienced a life event or going through a phase of a life event that is just Deep grief, horrible, traumatic. It's okay to be a mess. It's okay. I've said this before. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to be a mess and not even close to being at our best, and not even close to, and this is the second part of this, to not be able to use all our tools and our resources, our faith, our trust, our prayer, our spiritual resources, our mindfulness resources. It's okay to not be able to use any of that, to not have space for it, to not be functioning enough to do that, And as I said, leaning into the spiritual aspect, I was angry with God. I was so upset. I'm trying to compose myself. I couldn't pray. I didn't want to. I was so upset. And a couple of days after this happened, it happened on a Monday, and on the Wednesday I went to go see my pastor, who's just wonderful, and talking to her about this, and she completely affirmed and comforted me and said, it's okay that you can't do that. And she said, and I'll never forget it, she said, it's okay. She said, God sees you. It was letting me know that even though I couldn't be the functioning faith, trust, prayer based person that I normally might be, she reminded me that, it's okay. God sees you, and it's okay. It's okay that I was upset, that I was angry. So it's okay if we're in that space during these times. The worst times of our lives like this, these grief, these trauma events, they suck. They suck a lot. And I know I'm, basically saying water's wet, but they suck. And we aren't doing anything wrong when we are like that in those moments, when we're angry, broken in 1,000 pieces, dealing with trauma, dealing with deep grief, feeling like we're drowning. It's okay in those moments when we can't use any of the tools. So there's no judgment upon us, okay? I couldn't do any of that, and it was okay. So I'm here to say that. So those are the first two. That leads us into the third message I want to impart. Don't be judgy to people who are a mess. Don't be judgy. It's not up to us to decide how people have handled the trauma, the grief, the horrible events in life. As Christians, many folks have created a rule system, an ideal of sins, let's say, based on interpretations of things, based on what has been taught by certain people and taken in and said, okay. And as a society, not even as Christians, we also, as a society, at times place expectations upon people and how they should be handling things, how they should be dealing with things. We should, people. You should be this. You should be that. You shouldn't be this. You shouldn't have that. During the worst moments of their lives, whether it's the breaking up of a relationship, the breaking up of a marriage, a divorce, people that are dealing with addiction, people that are dealing with loss or of all different areas, not just the loss of a loved one, loss of a job, a home, this or that, major life events that will break people, that will, that can really, really just tear a person apart and put them in a space where they're not able to lean into things like faith or belief or trust or prayer. This was the worst week of my life. It was the worst day of my life, and each day after was horrible. And none of it mattered. None of the faith or coping skills or rational thought, all the tools that my life has been built on, everything's been built on, none of it mattered. And that's trauma. That's deep grief. I wasn't able to do any of it. But people can be, and I'm not saying I experienced this, but I know it exists out there. People can be judgy. People can, on the Christian side, say, well, if they fail to do this or that, they didn't believe or they didn't trust or they didn't lean into God, that's a sin or that's a failure on their part. Or in our society, we say, well, they're a failure, they're this or that. People can be judgy. People hold people to a certain standard of expectation based on their own ideals. How do we expect a person who is literally drowning to function the same as a person who is standing safely on the shore. But yet people do it. So I'm here to say, instead, love and empathy. As Jesus said, I require mercy, not sacrifice. So it's in the same sphere. Love and empathy. But again, a reminder, it's not up to us how other people have functioned in the worst moments and events of their lives. It's up to God. And I was angry with God in my situation. I was really angry. As my pastor said, it's okay. God sees you. And that landed. So again, reminding us, God sees us. God sees us. So thankfully, it's not up to us, and it's not up to other people to decide and judge how someone handles the worst moments and events and phases and periods and days of their lives. The moments when they are literally drowning in deep grief and trauma and ugliness, and they can't function. So maybe we would be well to remember that. No, to be clear, we do not want people to be a danger to themselves or others, to harm themselves or others. People don't get carte blanche when they're in these moments to act and do and be. But I'm talking about when maybe they don't, lean into the things we would expect them to. And maybe they do lean into other things that might harm themselves. We don't want that to happen. We want to protect them, but we don't want to judge them, is where I'm going to land with that statement. Again, it's not up to us. It's not up to us to judge. God sees us. Jesus sees us. Jesus, the way, the truth, the life, as he says in the Gospel of John. And what that means is he's the way, he's the truth, he's the life. It's up to him, not up to us. And he sees us. Grace and mercy, God knows us. God knows our story. That's all that matters. So, message number 3, just to recap, do not judge others in the worst moments of their lives or even in the best moments of their lives. It's not up to us. We don't know the things. And instead, let's be more loving and empathetic, be more Christ-like, be more like Jesus. It's a reminder for that. And on the flip side, if we happen to be the ones that are going through the terrible moments, if we're the ones that are drowning, don't worry about what other people say or think in terms of judging how we're handling it if we're not at our best. It's not up to them. Don't worry about it. And the last message I want to impart on all this, get help. But also at the same time, don't feel pressured or feel obligated to not be in grief, to not feel the grief, to not be drowning. Don't feel pressured or obligated to be out of that journey prematurely or when you're not ready. We have to, it's where we are sometimes, and we have to be in it. We have to let it be upon us. We have to be in that phase, but also get help. Get help. As I said, we don't handle grief. Grief handles us, whether we like it or not, in these traumatic moments, in these terrible, ugly phases and periods. Things happen. And again, as my friend Tim said, it's definitely a process, and one that will lead you rather than us leading it. Sometimes we have no choice. So, when I was in that moment, it was all about, I don't care about, again, to repeat myself, I don't care about God's will. Bobby, my Bob should be here. My little Bobby should be here. Bobby shouldn't have died. It was awful, and it was terrible, and it was unfair, and I was crushed, and I'm still crushed, and I was uncontrollably sobbing, and just an absolute puddle on the floor, and I still have my moments, as my therapist calls it, bursts of grief, and even now as I'm talking about it, I'm holding it back so that I could talk. And in those moments, in that week, when I was really the worst week of my life, I didn't care about the bigger life picture and what was on the other side, or gratitude for the time I had with him, or any of that, maybe at that time, toxic positivity type stuff. I didn't care. I had zero space for it. Zero space for anything but my grief. Grief took up all my space, and I had no room for anything else. And again, I'm here to say, and I'm saying that for the reason that it was okay. That it was okay. And it's okay if that's where you find yourself in a moment. But also with that, get help. Get help. I got help. immediately. Went to go see my pastor on the Wednesday and had a therapy appointment, thank God, through a loved one, that Thursday, very quickly. And I'm still in the therapeutic process, and I still sit down with my pastor, and sometimes the topic of Bob comes up, sometimes it doesn't. But I got help. And and all the things I've just described, my therapist, it's funny saying my therapist, but I like saying that, she told me that I was unable to process any of the stuff, any of the faith, any of it, land on any of that stuff, because our brain couldn't handle it when we're in deep grief. Worst day, worst week of my life. So, I'm going to land on this. If you find yourself there in that space where you're drowning, number one, remember, it's okay to be a mess and not be at our best in any way. It's okay to not be able to lean into faith and all the tools we might be accustomed to. That's trauma and that's deep grief, and it's okay if we find ourselves there, not being able to do that. Number three, let's not be judgy to people who are a mess. It's not up to us. So let's just be love and empathy and support in whatever way they need. And number four, don't feel pressured or obligated to not be in your grief or not be in that journey or not be dealing with the trauma don't feel pressured or obligated by yourself or anyone, but at the same time, get help. Get help. If you're in any kind of pain, get help. The help does help. So get help. And again, in the more words of Jim Valvano, don't give up. Don't ever give up. Thanks be to God. Amen. Okay, I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for sharing this space with me and allowing me this space to do this. And if you stuck around for the whole message, I hope in some way, shape, or form that you found it fruitful. Hopefully you are not in that space where you happen to be drowning, but maybe at one point in life you might have been, and maybe this helps bring some healing and comfort and validation and affirmation and just pure love to that part of you that might, because for me, and just to say one last thing, the grief is always there. It's always there. Like, the size of it never changed. It's always there. But as my therapist said, I expanded. I got, my capacity to hold it within me and have it live there, I expanded. I created more room for it. So maybe that's what happened to you in your journey or is still happening. So in some way, shape, or form, I hope all or part of this message helped you. Either way, again, thank you for being here. Thank you for being present with this. I wish you nothing but peace and love and fellowship with God as you go forward on your journey. I love you all. Have a great day. Have a great week. Ciao, ciao.